all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast, where every week me and my boy David go back and forth, bringing together movies, trying to find the perfect way to kill a weekend, the perfect viewing experience, the perfect double feature. David, how are you?
I am pumped up, Dean. I mean, these two movies were quite inspiring. They were movies that highlighted everything that a war movie should be about. And I'm really excited to talk about them.
You know what, me too. And on our war movie month, the March to War, this was the pairing that I think everyone probably wanted us to talk about. They're World War II movies. One of them I'll say is probably one of, if not the greatest World War II war film ever made. And the other one is really, really good. In the same category of great war films. All right, Dave was about to stab me. But yeah, we're talking about Saving Private Ryan and Dunkirk.
Yes, I am about to stab you for our pre-episode conversation about this, because I really do mean it when I say that these two are masterpiece films. I mean, on one hand, you have Steven Spielberg coming out and creating, literally, like you said, the greatest World War II film, with some of the most impressive cinematic sequences ever done. And on the opposite side, Christopher Nolan and Hans Zimmer come together to make just an outstanding hour 45-minute film. I mean, yeah, I don't know if I could ask anything else out of these movies.
That's kind of true, because I think these two films do everything a war movie should do. I think Saving Private Ryan is actually going through and just hitting off the check boxes of things World War II movies should do, and Dunkirk is trying to be different. It's trying to be more like an artsy kind of like World War II movie, because it's a very non-linear timeline. Things are happening in really interesting sequences. There's not a lot of like dialogue and character stuff, but I think that just comes with Christopher Nolan, because I don't think Christopher Nolan likes writing characters. I think he likes writing like interesting plots, and then the characters just have to exist for him to do it.
Once you added that second half to that argument, I would agree. I think he has an art to the way that he writes his movies that makes for great Nolan movies. And if we were measuring up against a lot of other standards for how you would make a movie, sure, there's probably a lot of rules being broken, but I still believe that this is probably his best, if not one of the top two or three that he's ever made.
For Nolan?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Prestige is great. I mean, obviously, it probably, to your point, is probably the one where the characters are most defined.
And
then that makes for like an amazing plot as a result. But aside from that, you go through maybe the Dark Knight with a standalone Dark Knight movie, but then the Dark Knight series. Then you have movies like Memento. Yeah, you do after a while kind of feel like maybe the story is more about the plot rather than the character.
I mean, that's kind of an argument a lot of people have for Inception, which I think Inception is the movie everybody says is Nolan's best movie. At least that's the consensus I hear a lot. I don't know if it's actually true, because I like Inception, but I don't think it's his best.
Yeah, I've seen kind of the argument between Prestige, Inception, and this movie. And it's a tough argument. And, I will say, whenever a director, an opposite of him, Spielberg, you could say this as well. Whenever you have a director who is like, has a handful of their best film, I mean, come on. I mean, the argument's kind of over once you have to say that.
Yeah, and then we have opposite of Dunkirk and Christopher Nolan, Spielberg and Saving Private Ryan. And can we be honest here? Saving Private Ryan might be the greatest World War II film made in the last 30 years. And it might not even be Spielberg's best movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because
And people hate Spielberg.
I don't know. Yeah, and we've oft. I think we've had one or two of his movies on the show. Raiders, obviously, and then I can't remember if we've had anything else.
I don't I think that might have been our only one, and that was our first episode.
Yeah,
And we
and
barely talked about Spielberg.
Raiders obviously is that side of him that is extremely, how would I put it, blockbuster. I mean, I get, but people
He
say
invented
that,
the damn thing. Yeah, he invented blockbusters.
yeah, and people see that in such like a negative light sometimes nowadays because of its commercial value, and it's like, well, that's kind of a crock of shit. I think sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, look, I get why people might not like Steven Spielberg. He is really into the aw part of filmmaking, right? He wants you to go aw a lot, where the family gets together. He makes like very nostalgic-y, sappy kind of movies. He's that kind of director. He wants to poke at your like heartstrings a little bit, like all the time. He's not making really weird avant-garde films. He's using really classic film techniques and trying to just make you go aw a lot. Like, but Jaws is fantastic. Jaws is legitimately an amazing film. E.T., like, screw you. E.T. defined a childhood for a generation. You can kiss my ass if you hate E.T. And
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
it's just, yeah, amazing film.
yeah, and even beyond that, like he made, Saving Private Ryan, great movie. He's still making good movies. I think Bridge of Spies and Lincoln were still very good films.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about Bridge of Spies, and then I think it's probably because that he still turns out films like Ready Player One, which
Mm,
people were so excited for because of the source material. It's a great book, and then turns out that not every adaptation ends up being a great movie because they're different mediums.
yeah, and
Um,
it's Spielberg has a very distinct style that doesn't mesh well with certain material.
yeah, and while you would think that that's probably a great one for Spielberg, being that it should have a lot of action and imagination and stunts, I guess is the way you would put it, because that's, I guess, action or whatever it would be that is
It's
in a lot of
designed
this
to be
stuff.
a blockbuster.
Yeah, and I think it's also just over the fact that I mean, I saw it. I saw it. Interestingly enough, I saw it via Movie Pass. Rip.
Rip my boy Movie Pass. I saw
Yeah.
some movies. I
What
saw
a
some bad movies on Movie Pass.
what a great year. I mean, but aside from that, I saw it like twice, just in my spare time with that. And once I saw it in the crowded theater, once I saw it in the not so crowded theater, and both times, like you could tell the energy in the room wasn't really meshing with the movie because the story fell flat.
Mhm.
Because it is a little bit formulaic, and that's in a way why I think Saving Private Ryan should be a reason that you shouldn't hate Spielberg, because it's not formulaic. It's completely its own.
Yeah, and look, I'm I'll I can get why people might not be a fan of like Schindler's List, where it's look, Schindler's List is a great film, but some people have arguments that it's not a very good depiction of certain aspects of history. But like Saving Private Ryan, like people show the Omaha beach scene in history class. That's where a lot of people see Saving Private Ryan for the first time is in history classes in high
Yeah,
school. So, but yeah, that's kind of the introduction we have here. Saving Private Ryan, Dunkirk. We should probably actually give people the log lines so they know what we're talking about.
I know. So we can finally dig into these two fantastic films. So here are the log lines for this week. For Saving Private Ryan, an American captain battles hopelessness and low morale to search and save a soldier set to be sent home as the last surviving child of his lone mother. For Dunkirk, a British soldier scrambles across the French coastline to find a way back home as the British Army waits for the boats of their fellow countrymen for a trip to safety.
Pretty easy to follow stories. We have a rescue mission and we have a rescue mission.
Yeah.
One is following the guys who are going to the rescue, and the other ones are the guys waiting to be rescued.
Yeah, I mean...
And sprinkling in those who are rescuing them.
Certainly. And you know, both of these films, I think, deal heavily in what a lot of World War II films deal heavily in, and that's, like, the difference between survival and morale. I mean, when we watched All Quiet on the Western Front, it was kind of apparent after a while that the movie was no longer about the morale of the soldier rather than just the survival of the war for an individual. And of course, we'll probably get to that next week when we get to Vietnam again.
Big yikes.
Which, you know, it'll be interesting to analyze the difference between something like World War One, where, you know, the soldiers were wondering why we were fighting the war, even though there was technically a reason there, and then Vietnam, where, well, you could question whether or not there was a reason. And you could certainly find a similar low morale, although it's interesting because obviously pop culture becomes a part of the picture in that world, whereas World War One was pre-pop culture. So I'm interested to see how that.
Well, it was pre pop culture being everything, right? I think pop culture has become more and more like has seeped into more aspects of all of culture as time has gone on. You know, it's the things where, you know, there's going to be a statue of Homer Simpson at some point in a town square.
Yeah,
I'm almost positive that's going to be a thing within our lifetimes.
I think, because I guess I'm looking at it from a lens of what I learned in a particular history class I took in high school, which is, you know, take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting because pop culture in that world takes on the place of something like art, poetry, things that existed in the kind of pre-1920s world, in which pop culture, advertising, all these modern things start to come into the world.
Yeah.
But you know, we'll search that next week. Let's not spend up too much time on that. Let's get back to the main
task
event
at hand. Yes, the main event here. We have. Where do you want to start? Because I watched Dunkirk into Saving Private Ryan,
and I did the opposite way.
Okay.
If I was to say so, I chose Saving Private Ryan because of, obviously, the intro sequence in that movie is iconic. It's legendary.
It is so good. It gave actual World War II veterans like flashbacks.
Yeah, and Dunkirk I then did because, well, I love the movie, so I thought and I think the finale to Dunkirk is insane. I mean, I think it's perfect. So that's the reason I chose the two, is I thought they both had good bookends for the double feature. Why did you end up going Dunkirk to Saving Private Ryan?
Well, Dunkirk I had never seen before. This is actually this is the first time I've ever seen Dunkirk, and I was kind of excited. I wanted to see it, and I'd seen Saving Private Ryan infinite number of times. Like as a kid, that was one of my favorite movies. Which probably shouldn't have watched this as a young child. It's a little gory, whatever. But yeah, and I think the ending of Saving Private Ryan is just very good. I don't know either. I think you can start either one of these into the other one and they work perfectly well. I guess it's just a coin flip. Which one do you want to talk about first? Do you want to like hate on me for not loving Dunkirk like a child, or do you want to talk about, again, one of the greatest movies ever made?
Well, let's go. Let's go with Saving Private Ryan first, because I think when we get into these more interesting divided discussions, those are always better for our second half of the show. But yeah, I'm willing to jump right into Saving Private Ryan.
Okay.
And why not go right back to that intro sequence? I mean, let's talk about that technically, because everybody understands, I think, why obviously that goes at the beginning of the movie because historically it's them landing on the beach. It's Normandy. It's D-Day. It's exactly what it is. You
It's
know.
when the Americans like showed up to start kicking ass in Europe.
Mm.
My very narrow view of World War II history has become more and more apparent. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's when the Americans showed up.
Yeah, and what I like so much about that technically is first of all, this is a long movie. It's a very long movie.
Yeah, it feels
And
really tight though.
it's certainly because it's constant action, constant, and they move smoothly from every bit. But I almost see this film as like an epic of sorts in that there are almost chapters to the movie. And I feel like this is the first chapter because it takes up about 30 minutes of the film,
Yeah.
which is so weird to think about. You can say a sequence takes up 30 minutes and that it would still not defy any rules, but it does. It's perfect. I mean, you get your main character, you get the tone of the film, you get an amazing hook sequence,
Oh
which is
yeah.
something I think a lot of not in a lot of films, but it's something that some films take for granted, and whereas they jump right into it, like a film like All Quiet on the Western Front doesn't really have a hook sequence.
Not really. I mean, it makes an attempt at it, but it's not that good.
It's
It's
yeah
not as
for
good as this.
yeah for the purpose of the film, whereas that might have been good for the book to like set up the idea, which I think is more important for a piece of literature. You really need to set tone and visuals in a movie, and this is the perfect sequence to do that.
Like it's fascinating because they how it's shot first of all is so chaotic. And
Yeah,
there's never a big master, there's not really that many like super tight close-ups. Everything feels like you're in the PT boat going up to the beach. Everything feels like you're on the beach with them. Everything is done at eye level. Everything is done, we have the low angles looking up at the beach. We have everything is meant to put you in the feet of the soldiers.
yeah,
And also like that it's just so like the sound design in the opening sequence is amazing. Like you hear all the gunfire, everything feels like pure chaos. It feels like you're on the beaches of Normandy, which
yeah.
yeah,
I was listening to it on headphones rather than over like a
over
sound system,
speakers.
and my
Yeah.
headphones, the ones I was using, have like a bass control. I mean, you turn the bass up on that thing, and with it right up against your ears, it's insane. You could feel the impact of every projectile on that beach.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, I think what you say about putting the audience in the shoes of the soldier is really important. POV. I mean, you're not just supposed to like start to relate to Tom Hanks' character. You really need to like be. You need to be acquainted with the physical stakes of the film right away, and
Hmm.
I think it's a brilliant way to do it, especially with all the POV shots, with like you said the close. They're not quite POV shots, but they're inserts that are from like a wider lens, so that they look like something you're seeing on the beach.
Or
Um,
and the other thing is the first time we see the Americans interact with the Germans in like the fight when the
yeah,
PT boat doors drop down, there's just a slaughter. It turns into pure bloodshed, pure chaos.
hmm.
And that's a thing. And like as a viewer, as an audience member, it's like it's terrifying because it's like it's so abrupt and it's keeps going.
The one thing I was going to say about this sequence that really wraps it up nice like a bow is if you go back and analyze the structure of it,
Mhm.
um, really could be its own thing. Like I know we talk about in one episode, I believe it was another war movie we were watching. I think. Oh, it was actually last year when we did Pearl Harbor,
Oh yeah, the Pearl Harbor, yeah, Pearl Harbor and Tora Tora Tora.
where we thought Pearl Harbor could have been like a short series instead of a movie because it was
Yeah,
so goddamn long.
yes, yes, it was
um,
too long.
but I think this is where I go back on that and say, well, maybe Pearl Harbor is just not that great because I think what I think about when I go back to Pearl Harbor is that, yeah, well, it probably would have been better to cut it up and make it a series. I still think
Hmm.
that overall, those episodes would really just be about following them to Pearl Harbor. It wasn't. It wouldn't really be about me following the characters. Whereas this first sequence wraps up in that half hour where there's a beginning where you're presented with the problem, getting on the beach and surviving. Throughout it, Tom Hanks' character makes moves that, fighting against the very physical stakes of I'm already too in over my head physically and mentally in this. And then moving across obstacles such as the bayonet thing where he puts the gum on the mirror and then,
He has to figure out how are we going to get around these like staked in MG42s that are just firing down on us. How are we going to maneuver around the bunkers? How are we going to get through the murder holes, basically?
Which even then sets up the whole premise of that in the film. The solution will always be your fellow soldier, the guy standing next to you, because then he sends the sniper to go take out that. It really sets up everything perfectly, but cuts off at the end of the sequence when they're at the top. Almost feels like it could be an ending in itself of a or like I said, a chapter or a separate. I thought of it at the time. I was like, wow, this would have been a really good, like, if you only had $1 million but you wanted to pitch this film to a studio. As a Spielberg, you could just do this sequence on your own, show him it, and then be like, okay, here's money, go finish the film. Obviously, he's Steven Spielberg, so he didn't have to do that. But,
yeah. And this would have been a titanic undertaking for only $1 million.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But, even then, I really do think that that's one of the most important parts of the movie is have satisfaction in the middle of it, but always be marching towards the goal of the movie, which they don't even get, like I said, until after this is over.
It's really crazy. We don't get introduced to the main objective of the film, actually going to save Private Ryan, until like half hour and some change in the movie, and we don't even see Private Ryan until what, 2 hours, hour and a half into the movie. Like, we're in the final act by the time we meet him.
Yeah, it is a long time in there. And, I do think, because a lot of people often say you shouldn't introduce characters in, like, the later part of the movie. I think that's a load of crap. I mean, I think it really just depends on what your story is. If you've been awaiting the arrival of a character, or if that makes sense to the plot, yeah, you should always be able to introduce characters in maybe your late second or third acts. I think this film kind of goes beyond the 3-act structure, so that's kind of a moot point. But yeah, I am fascinated. I'd be interested in kind of scaling this to, like, I know the cut I watched was, like I said, 3.5 hours. You watched probably the 2-hour 45-minute cut then?
Yeah, I watched the theatrical release.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to see scaling it down, like what proportionally the point at which in the film, like, Ryan comes in, when we get the orders to save Ryan, what would that look like in like an 120-page standard,
Like, what would happen if you even had to trim this down from being almost 3 hours to like a tight 2?
Yeah, not even trimming it down for the purpose of that, but just to see proportionately, do all the beats line up on their times. That'd be something I'd be really interested in exploring.
It'd be interesting because the story in this actually beats out really quickly and it's really well done.
Yeah.
But also, I almost forgot. On the beaches of Normandy, the sequence we have here, there are actually 2 veterans of the Normandy invasion that are featured in the scene. Unfortunately, they are not people. They the PT boats that are being sent in, the 2 that we see, those were actually used in the invasion of Normandy, which is kind of fucking cool that those things survive. What is it, 40 years, 60 years or whatever to be in this movie? That's kind of cool.
Excellent wordplay, because I thought you were about to say there were some 70, 80-year-olds on the beach of Normandy in this sequence, which in itself, I think just the pyrotechnics going off in the beach, which at this point are maybe even as simple as like air cannons going off, would still give them a heart attack. But
yeah. Oh my god. Okay. First of all, this is a great example of when practical effects just work better than CGI.
Yeah.
Because in this sequence, you know what's CGI in this sequence?
Probably nothing.
Basically, it's the bullets flying through the air, and that's it.
Yeah. So
that every
sometimes, I will admit, sometimes in these films, especially one shot a little later, that like this one, they do have prop lead bullets, and that's what you're
yeah,
seeing. Is you're not seeing like the actual bullets, you're seeing the leads.
yeah. It it's amazing. This sequence is great. And I know we could probably talk about just the opening Omaha Beach sequence, how they had thousands of extras here to do this. It took 4 days for them to shoot. Almost all of the camera work was done on the day,
Yeah.
and how it works in the story. And this does work great as a standalone story, as a sequence. There's a 3-act structure in the opening sequence of the movie. But we do have to move on eventually. We do actually have to save Private Ryan at some point.
Yeah, and I think this and Dunkirk, to compare the two for a moment, have a really good structure in that they have a wavelength to them in which the action goes up, then down, then up, then down, much similar to what you're probably experiencing as a soldier in any of these situations.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we do trend downward into kind of a lull. Not necessarily boring speaking, but that there's a lull in the action, and we get a little bit more into the characters. We set up our crew again to go save Private Ryan. We grab the journalist who is going to be in over his head throughout this movie.
He's a translator, but yeah, he is still way over his head.
Mm.
Yeah.
Or he was a writer. That's why I confuse him with a journalist. Writing a book, though. I think it's a personal project. And then we're off again, pretty quickly. And we're marching through the French countryside, trying to find whoever the hell this Private Ryan is. If I'm remembering the sequence correctly, they run across... Well, I guess we don't need to go through the whole plot necessarily, but this starts to get to the point where we're learning more about the group of soldiers, which is always fun when you can kind of get an ensemble out of these kinds of movies. Which
we have a pretty good ensemble cast here. We actually have a pretty star-studded ensemble here, which is a little weird. We have Tom Sizemore, we have Adam Goldberg, we have Vin Diesel in here. We have pretty good like array of characters here.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting note that you kind of glossed over. Vin Diesel is in this movie.
Yeah. Okay, how many people forgot Vin Diesel was in Saving Private Ryan? All right, I'm raising my hand.
Every time I watch it, yeah.
Every time you watch it, you're like, he's in this? What?
Yeah.
It's really weird, because apparently this is right after Vin Diesel made his first movie, and Steven Spielberg casted him. So I think he only got paid like $10,000 to be in the movie. It was like, he didn't get paid a lot to be in the movie.
And by the way, for all of the crap people have to talk about him just being a Fast and Furious poster child and not really being an actor, watch this movie, because he does a pretty good job for the character that he's in.
Oh yeah, honestly, I like Vin Diesel as an actor in some of the stuff I've seen him in, like this movie. He's used perfectly well. He's a really good actor in this.
Yeah.
And then, he was in The Pacifier, but whatever, we'll gloss over that.
Hey, we're Pacifier stands at this podcast, okay? I Once Upon a Time owned that movie on DVD. Not really proud to admit that, but
Gotcha. But yeah, like we have a lot of really good actors in here, and we go on, and unfortunately our boy Vin Diesel, he's the first of the crew to be taken in action.
Right.
And it's a really sad moment, because he gets shot by a sniper, and his company can't, or the rest of the soldiers can't go out to like save him, because if they go out, they're going to get shot by a sniper again. So they have to like wait and watch him bleed out.
Yeah.
For like an excruciatingly long time.
I love that both these movies have this sort of, it's a hard pill to swallow and even harder to watch it sequences. Because this is the one for this one. There's one in which the medical die a little later that's also equally as hard to watch.
Very, yeah.
And then Dunkirk obviously has its moments as well. But yeah, this one, especially with like the rain and some of the POV shots they do for his character, yeah, just totally. I love that this movie has a range that is able to capture not only the emotion of violence and terror, such as in the opening, but also like the emotion of like humanity and like realizing death is coming on. Like in this sequence, like just the rain and some of the ways they play with the light is just
And
beautiful.
and the other thing is he's pulling out this letter he wrote to his parents, and he's just yelling, please make sure this gets to them.
Yeah.
Like, I please make sure my parents see this. And he doesn't even, he knows he's dying. And it's so painful. Again, Vin Diesel is a really good actor in this.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know,
He
man.
can say more than Groot. Who knew?
So yeah, would go on to also be in Triple X. Would be the voice of Iron Giant.
Iron Giant is a fantastic film.
Yeah. And
So good.
by the way, that's his next movie. So I mean, you could say he's on a roll.
Vin Diesel might have the actual best streak in filmmaking history. We'll find out soon.
It's not that great, but I'm looking at it. Right
It drops
now.
off.
It
It drops off.
It's ups and downs, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we have Private Caparzo, Mr. Vin Diesel. He goes, and then the team has to rally again and go basically across town to reconvene with another company so they can try and find Private Ryan.
Right.
And suddenly Nathan Fillion is in this movie, and Paul Giamatti's in this movie.
Right.
And
a lot of people end up showing up throughout this film. Not only do we get the Vin Diesel actual character moment, but cameos from the likes of Paul Giamatti, Ted Danson, which I was like, he's not always just an old guy. Like,
I didn't know that was a thing.
yeah, Nathan Fillion. I mean, later on, or earlier when the whole like we're sending a letter home to Private Ryan's mom thing is going on. Bryan Cranston is somewhere in that sequence.
Yeah, Bryan Cranston's in there, and I'm like, is this before Malcolm in the Middle, or did he just do that part like in between?
Good question. Let me do an IMDb search here real quick.
Yeah, well, you're doing that, but I just gotta explain, like, the casting in this is ridiculous, and I guess it goes with like Spielberg. He's just able to just get anyone he wants for a movie. Especially especially like in '98 when this movie is being filmed or when it comes out.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You're asked to be in a war movie directed by Steven Spielberg. You're not going to say no.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at it here. I'm in the 80s. I'm in the 90s. He's had a lot of experience so far. We're past 1995. Still scrolling because he's done so much. Saving Private Ryan here is 1998. No, I mean, he doesn't get Malcolm in the Middle until 2000 is when it's listed. Yeah.
That's okay. Now I can't wait for. We're gonna do an episode where it's just TV shows, and we're just gonna watch Malcolm in the Middle.
Oh, I'm always ready for that. I mean, Malcolm in the Middle probably my favorite, but you know, obviously known for a lot of other things too. Like I said, I had to thumb through about 50 other credits before I even found Saving Private Ryan. I didn't know he was on Chips. That's interesting.
He's on Chips?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably. There's a lot of stuff here. I could probably say that he was on Hill Street Blues.
I think that you could just do a podcast of watching Bryan Cranston movies and never repeat a performance.
Yeah, I mean, Baywatch. He's on something called Dead Space, but I know that is not the video game, so that's not what I want. Yeah, I mean, we'll get to a Bryan Cranston deep dive someday.
One day. But as we move on, so they meet a Private Ryan, but is not the Private Ryan, which is kind of interesting. And this also goes to the point of how Fubard, the 101st Airborne, was on D-Day. They make a mention of it in the movie, but this is actually like pretty accurate.
Yeah.
To what happened in real life was when they were dropping the airborne soldiers into France during D-Day, the planes were getting shot at, and it kind of really messed up the drop points. So imagine you're a soldier and you get just dropped in the middle of France and you're by yourself
It's got
out
to
in
be really
like enemy
shocking.
territory. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, thank you, Dwight D. Eisenhower. I mean, he hailed as a hero, but who knows what effect that had.
Yeah. But that was like the reality for like how many people in that battlefield were just like, I am in the middle of France. I know no French, no German. I have a gun and I'm hearing a shit ton of gunfire going around me. And I need to find somebody real quick or the Germans are just gonna shoot me. And that I again, these guys were made of like tougher stuff.
Yeah, and opposite of that chain of thought, like the thing that really would terrify me in that moment is not just I gotta make a move or else the Germans are gonna find me. It's that even if I do make a move, if it's the wrong move, I could run into the Germans. Like I don't
Yeah,
know.
cuz that's the thing. The 101st were dropped in the middle of the fucking night. So it's pitch black
Yeah,
when they
which
drop in.
may or may not help you. I don't know. I mean,
You
moving
can
by the
never
cover
use your
of night.
flashlight to see where you're going. You can
Yeah.
never light a cigarette.
Um.
Oh, insanity. In basically World War II, D-Day was insanity.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest offensives in military history.
Yeah.
So I guess moving on, we'll cover a few more things here, plot wise, and then I also have an interesting question having to do with the sound design,
Hmm.
because that is one of the best parts of this movie. But some of the major plot points from here on out is they do eventually find Ryan.
Yes. They
Um,
lose a couple of people on the way.
yeah,
Very sad, very tragic because you get connected to the characters.
certainly, and they do eventually find him, he refuses to leave his post at which he was again not supposed to be at, but he is a loyal soldier.
Hmm.
Because it is interesting how they, and this is kind of a thing that you notice throughout the movie if you're not watching it for the first time or something like this. You do begin to notice that even when they run into an obstacle, it's not really there. There's two types of obstacles. I think there's either actual war obstacles, which are common for most war movies, or you can kind of start to see the spine of the plot in that, certain things like, oh, they found the wrong Private Ryan, or they get there and instead of Ryan just be willing to go, like of course he's going to refuse to leave because he doesn't want to leave his friends behind that he
And
feels
at
are
that
deserting.
point, it's not even he wants to leave his friends behind. He's like, all my brothers are dead. These are the closest things to brothers I got.
Yeah.
The guys I'm sitting next to in the foxhole, these are my family. Like, I ain't leaving these guys behind.
Yeah, and it really does speak to the something we've offset on this show about writing, and that really flesh out your story and ask all the questions because it can make for some of the most dramatic moments in your movie. I mean, how much more dramatic can you get when the mission you've been sent to do bears on one guy and his refusal to actually be saved? I don't know. I mean, and then too makes for, as we get to the end, an even more emotional ending when you realize that the old guy at the beginning of the movie was Private Ryan himself, and he's returning to the grave of the man who saved him.
Yeah, and the only thing he wants to know is if he's lived a good life. Did he live a life good enough for these guys to have died saving him? And it's like, oh, that hurts my soul.
Yeah,
Because that's got to be something you would think about. You're a soldier. All your buddies. Somebody or buddies or whatever in the foxhole died so you can live, and then there's that guilt. Like, am I living a good enough life to warrant those guys sacrificing theirs to save me?
yeah,
And that's kind of the thing of the movie. And it's like, wow, this shit is heavy as hell. I
absolutely.
I feel really bad. But fuck yeah, dude. Yeah. Private Ryan, you got 3 kids and a dog. Yeah, you made it, dog. Oof.
Yeah, and it really does. I think above all, too, kind of speaks to the point. It's like it's never going to be enough in that character, and I think that's the root of the character they're trying to get to.
Hmm.
Just how it's nothing will ever be enough to have him leave the bridge. Nothing will ever be enough to have him feel like he actually lived up to the life of another man that he feels like he wasted in a way. And I mean, what a dramatic way to end the movie. What a an emotional way to end the movie. I mean, for God's sakes, if you got a dry eye in the house, then you're not human. But
Yeah. And
um,
especially when it goes out and it's waving the American flag majestically in the wind.
yeah.
And you're just like, God damn, go America. My
Uh,
narrow view of World War II is getting narrower by the minute. America saved the world. That is my World War II history. Go America.
yeah, I mean, some could see it that way, certainly. And I guess a final quote before we get, or final note before we get to the break is I did want to ask what your favorite piece of sound designing was in the movie, because for me, the some of the yells from the privates in this movie are just like I've heard them in Call of Duty games, but and they're probably voiced by the same people, but some of just like the yelling between each soldiers are like perfect. I don't know. In
It
my mind, there's something about them that just hits the ear
that
just
like
right.
background dialogue where you're like, it's not that Walla Walla. Walla Walla, for people that know, is just random like gibberish speak you put in the background of movies that
Yeah,
you can tell somebody's saying something, but you can't make out what it is. In
yeah,
this movie, they don't do that. It's like there's real talking, there's real conversation. It feels like you're around people, and there's yelling and there's chaos.
yeah.
Yeah, no,
And
it's very
specifically, the
good.
ones coming from some of the soldiers you see on screen don't just feel like ADR or kind of sound design, because there's a little bit of reverb to a lot of the dialogue in this movie, which was an interesting choice in my mind. But when you really get down to like those guttural yells between people shouting for orders and ammo and all these things, it really hits the ear just perfectly.
I think my favorite bit of sound work, sound design has been and will ever be the shell shock that Captain Miller goes through. That silence, that ringing in his ear where it drowns out everything,
Hmm.
and you're just in his head at those moments, and it's insane. Have you ever had an experience like that where it's like something like really loud goes off and it rings your ears and you can't hear anything? Because like I've had like fireworks and stuff go off like by my head because I'm an idiot, and it's like I hear that ringing and then somebody's talking to you and it's just there's no like definition to it.
Yeah, I don't know if I've had quite a moment like that because I've never been around. I was never around a person when the thing happened to me. But have a Ford Bronco go through the back of your car window, and yeah, you will have an interesting experience like that.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and one of the things that really stood out to me about that too is that moment really is repeated across a lot of media nowadays. It's
Hmm.
like the standard for shell shock or, like you said, just ringing in the ear, something like this. Because what's interesting to me too is that it's not even about the ringing in the ear in the moment. It's about capturing the emotion of not knowing what to do next and kind of getting overwhelmed. And I feel
Hmm.
like that becomes a lot of people who try to like copy it focus too much on the physical aspect of it's just about like being disoriented because of the impact. But this movie really gets to the root of the core that it's the impact, but then it's also that the impact forces you to stop and look around at what's going on. And it's like the moment when he puts the helmet back on and there's still like bloody water inside of it, but he doesn't really notice even.
And
A
it's
great shot.
and it's the moment where when he comes out of it, he's like, I have to do something. I'm the guy in charge right now, and I I am fucked up.
Yeah,
It's so good. Every
yeah,
emotional beat, every moment of the movie go has a point to it, which is very good. Is why this is, one of the best movies. At least a lot of people say this is like the best World War II film or war film ever made. I've heard that spouted a lot. Um, and I think it still holds up. This movie is over 20 years old. This still holds up for me.
oh, absolutely. I don't think there's anything in this movie that could age, honestly.
Now we have to talk about another movie that came out only a few years ago that we have to analyze and compare to this, that is trying to attempt to do something different than Saving Private Ryan, and I don't know if it's better.
No, I know if it's better, and
You
frankly,
you know?
shame on you for even insinuating. But we will get to the second half of the show where I will absolutely chew out Dean for criticizing this movie at all. Uh, and we will do that right after this.
right after this, hashtag Dunkirk overrated. I'm going to leave you with that on the break.
Absolutely
What?
not. I refuse right after this. And Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? No, never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here, okay? So you're going to need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay, now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're gonna need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No, listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money.
One of his best, if not one of the best World War II movies, because I mean, who cares
I'm
if you don't
stupid.
connect to the characters? I mean,
what are you talking
it's
about?
all about the survival, and there's not even any dialogue in the movie, and that's one of the best parts about
it's
it.
half spectacle. It's an effects budget.
The spectacle
That's what
is
this is.
It's another layer to why this is a great
Bro,
movie.
like, come on. I don't know anybody's name. Harry Styles is in this movie, for God's sakes.
No, honestly, I mean, we're back, everybody, but
we're back.
Dean he's in over his head with this one. I mean, you may as well just turn the show off here and go watch Dunkirk and see what happens.
If you want to watch Dunkirk if you want to turn your brain off. That's that movie. Christopher Nolan is pretentious Michael Bay.
I hope you're willing to eat those words.
I'm ready. What are you serving here for these words? Because now, I'm spitting truth right here. I'm spitting hot fire. That's what's going on.
I could make a list and deconstruct everything you're about to say, but I guess let's start from the beginning. I mean, the movie opens on a quiet sequence where Nazi posters are falling on some British soldiers, a company patrolling through a French town on the coast of Dunkirk, France. They are what seems to be on their way to the beach, like a lot of companies have converged on. They aren't quite sure where they are is what I get out of it, and they're looking around at these posters the Nazis are dropping on them that say things like, we're coming for you, you're
surrounded.
Yeah, it's an intimidation
no way
tactic. Out. Yeah. And then the guns start firing, and this is another one that I think is a great sequence to start the film on. Because it's a little bit of action before we, like I said, in both these movies, there's a good wavelength, and this starts to ramp you up right before we get to a little bit of lull, and before we get to the next ramp up. So we follow our main character, who is a British soldier trying to escape, played by Fionn Wayhead, Tommy. What a great character. I mean, absolutely.
Bro, come on. You don't have to scrounge around here. I'm be real with you. I didn't know his name for like half the movie.
Admittedly,
I knew George names.
It might not even be said. A lot of these characters' names actually might not even be said, now that I think about it, because, and I know you might have a problem with this, but really one of the things I love so much about this movie is the lack of dialogue. And it's almost to the point where it's a big no-no in a lot of movies to just be exposition. And some might say, if we're referencing Nolan, that was one of the problems with his most recent Tenet, that a lot of it was just exposition and it didn't really add up. But I almost think the exposition in this movie has a weird subtext to it that kind of connects everybody because everybody's trying to figure out when two things: when the ship is coming, and where's the enemy. And every piece of exposition you get throughout the movie in the dialogue, the few bits you do get, you can feel the emotion of trying to get that information and giving that information out.
I think it might just be my issue with Nolan's way of writing characters, where he's so lost if he's not having a character explain something. Like, a character has to explain a part of the plot, and then he knows how to write them. But which is kind of like the problem with Tenet. From what I hear, most people complain about it is everybody's an exposition machine, and I'm like, no, that's like half of Nolan's characters in all his movies. They're exposition machines.
Because that's where he started.
Very few characters have a, yeah.
I mean, if you go back to a movie,
very few characters in his movies have, Go ahead, David. I'll just keep rambling about how I hate how Nolan writes characters. You actually have a point.
Well, you're wrong, but yeah, I mean, if you go back to some of his early movies like Following or Memento, both of those movies rely heavily on their premise, and Nolan is a little bit complicated for his own purposes in that, while Following was fairly simple, it's just about a guy who follows people and starts to break into their homes to, like, it's like a hobby for, Following is an interesting film, go watch it. It's fairly simple, but in that movie, I do think there's a side of Nolan that you see here in which he's able to focus on a character and get them to be emotional. Memento is, I think, where he starts to develop what he really wants to be, which is the thriller master, where he can make a movie with an interesting premise that has a bunch of tension, and all of it is based on this very interesting, nobody's ever done it thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, he can't do that in this movie. And, it's a war movie. Tons of them have been done. The best one ever has apparently already been done. It's a historical event, so you can't even, like, really mix around the plot for it to be, like, totally new.
Yeah.
So what left do you have to rely on? Well, I think first of all, he can do one thing, in that let's strip away all, like, the extraneous dialogue. Let's make it so that none of the movie has all these, like, wishy-washy, corny discussions between characters. Everything is about survival in this movie, which I think helps, not hurts, this movie, is that everything is totally about survival. The other thing I think is brilliant is that he takes his editing techniques, which is probably his strength, and that incredible score with Hans Zimmer, and creates this staggered structure to the movie that creates that flow throughout every plot point. And I will go back to the first time I did watch this. It was slightly confusing, and then I wasn't expecting it out of the movie. But by the end, I put two and two together, and
I don't think I was confused at all from the movie, if I'm being completely honest. I think my issue came from that the way the movie is staggered. I understood what was going on. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, these guys have been on the beach for a week. And it's the thing where they're waiting on the beach for a week. A boat's coming, and it takes a day for the boat to get from England to Dunkirk, and a plane's coming, and it takes an hour for a plane to get from England to Dunkirk. And I'm like, okay, I get this, and they're all going to convene at the climax. They're all going to get there at the same time. Things are going to happen, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, okay, I get that. And then the fact that there's not a lot of dialogue, because, again, Nolan has his things with dialogue. Whatever, it does work for the movie. How you stated, it works for the movie. It's all about survival. There's no extraneous chit chat. It's just, we don't want to be here. I don't want to be your friend. I just want to live. And I get that. It's cool. The characters are there, but it's like, I didn't care about anybody, to be honest. Like, no, I didn't care that much about the soldiers, other than, oh my God, these are real. In reality, these were probably real people. I hope those real people lived.
Yeah.
But in the terms of the story, it's like, it was good. I thought the editing was great. I thought the score was fantastic, because Hans Zimmerman, I think, has not made a bad score ever. And yeah, but, like, I don't understand why so many people thought this was the greatest film of 2017.
It was, but you're wrong. That's fine.
Ow. Okay.
Because
Okay.
I guess let's tackle it one by one here, because you've watched the movie, obviously, listener. Most likely,
Yeah.
that's why you're watching our podcast. So you know mostly the plot, and even then, it'd be kind of confusing to run down the plot.
Because it jumps around, and it's the thing where what Nolan likes being more complicated than he needs to be. That's
Yeah.
like his shtick.
Uh, yeah, I think that's certainly his shtick. I think it works here, and I guess let's tackle that first, then get into the characters, then get into some of the more obvious things we'll be able to praise, like the cinematography and the score and the sound
Yeah.
design and those things. The plot. I mean, I think that the way the story is structured works very well for this movie, because there's no lulls. There's no points of like feeling dull in this movie. Right when you get to a moment of calm, it really, like I said, takes that wavelength and just goes down, then right back up again with something else. There's no moments in which you're just waiting around for something to happen. And I think that's the reason ultimately he chose to edit this movie or write the movie in this way, is because he knew that if he didn't, there's time between certain events that would make the audience fall asleep, basically.
Yeah, like don't get me wrong, how it's structured is very good. I don't know. I keep coming back to my issues with the movie. I'm sorry. Like it's just I think it's kind of overrated a little bit.
Well, yeah, we're breaking that down to see why you're wrong, but so we can agree at least that the structure of the movie works. And
Yeah, I think the structure is probably its strongest aspect because it does feel like I'm seeing every aspect of Dunkirk.
yeah, and how like even the interconnected events come together for the characters. And I guess that's our next point. The characters. I had the
You
complete
can't.
opposite
You have to.
reaction.
Really?
Yeah.
The characters I feel are the weakest aspect of this movie.
No, I mean, I feel like the one thing that because yeah, most of the time in most movies, what you're going to connect to a character on is some piece of characteristic or emotion that you clue into in the early part of the movie, right?
Yeah, when you're like most times, you see a character and you're like, I can identify with this character, or they have some characterization aspect about them that is relatable, or something you can understand, or something you can attach to.
And one of the things that
Beyond another human being.
yeah, and one of the things I think that for me works for this movie is it's a war film, and especially one based in a very physical stake, in that there's not a whole lot there's the main goal, which is getting more than 30,000 soldiers off the beach, and admittedly, unless you're paying attention, that piece is just kind of glossed over in the dialogue, and it's an important piece of the history of Dunkirk, sure, but yeah, maybe it's that we weren't supposed to focus on the numbers. But ultimately, what gets me is that every character that you come across at the onset of the movie, whether it be Tommy, who is our kind of mainish character, he's the British soldier who we follow from the very start.
Yeah, he's the main character for the Dunkirk story. Then we have Farrier, who is played by Tom Hardy. He's our main character for the airplane sections. And what is his name? All right, the boat crew, whatever.
Yeah, so
the story of Dying George.
Yeah, George, who don't call him Dying George, because I swear that's one piece of criticism some people had about this movie, that kid basically just dies, and I think that's a load of crap.
What? He just dies.
No, I mean he dies. Listen, I think you really have to think about it from the context of the beginning. First of all, we're in 1930. I can't remember.
We're not even in 30s. No, yeah, we are in 30s. It's
Yeah,
it's 1939-ish, I think.
Probably.
I don't really know. Which I'm sorry for anybody who is actually a surviving member of Dunkirk and is listening to this. I'm sorry I don't know the history.
I don't think anybody is.
I don't think so. Wouldn't be surprised.
But
So,
anyway, but either way, I think what's interesting to take into account, it's May 1940, by the way. It's interesting to take account that context historically of the culture of the time. George is a 17-year-old kid from small town England. He's like he says in the movie, he's never ever done anything important in his life, and probably might never do anything important. But
Yeah.
having courage to get on the boat and go save however many soldiers you can on a little dinghy against German Luftwaffe, I mean, that takes a lot of guts that I think a lot of people just kind of take for granted. And I see as like, yeah, that kid has spunk. And
Yeah,
even
he
when
has
he's,
spunk, and then he gets killed by an English soldier who's being a prick.
and it's not necessarily about having George become like the hero because he was the people who pulled him out of the water. It's about the fact that there are a lot of forgotten tragedies in war. In such a movie, by the way, like you said earlier, in All Quiet on the Western Front, a lot of those characters are forgettable because they are picked off, but they are forgettable tragedies that we have to remember in certain terms. And George is one of those in which he gets to be on the cover of the paper. He did something with his life, just getting on that boat and saying, "I'm willing to help my fellow countrymen." That takes a lot of courage.
I get that it takes courage. I understand that. Like it's a courageous thing to do. It's like, oh man, I might be walking into certain doom or certain death, but your point at the beginning of the movie, he jumped on because he's like, fuck it, France sounds fun.
No, it's not just because France
That's
sounds
what
fun.
he says in the beginning of the movie. That's why he jumps on the
that's
boat.
not what he says at the beginning of the movie.
He just wants to kill a weekend.
The beginning of the movie, it is not just because he wants to kill a weekend like some 1980s teenager. He gets on because he sees that this is a sacrifice to be made. He sees that as a little 17-year-old boy. And I doubt many of us at 17 years old would have enough courage to... Of course, he probably doesn't take into the whole account of like exactly what that means.
I mean, if we want to go with 17-year-old kids who had a backbone, may I point you to all the 17-year-old men who had, or boys who had to march through Omaha Beach?
Sure, but like I said, it's like a lot of kids that age don't fully realize exactly what they're getting into, but the fact that they made the choice is still an act of courage. So anyway, I think everybody's kind of cynical and full of shit whenever they say that. I'm just gonna say it straight out. I mean,
look, I can see when you look into the characterization and you're pulling out these, oh yeah, this is like the thematic point of him. This is his, like, the overarching thing, and you subscribe those deep meanings to him. I can understand that, but like, bro, he just dies. Scarecrow from Batman Begins beats his ass and he dies.
Okay, because then let me raise this question too. If he was to die by being hit by a bullet, from one of the planes, would it be any better?
Probably, yeah.
But that's
if
my
it was
point.
A thing where if he just did something other than, oh man, I was on this boat and I kind of sort of helped save a British soldier, but that British soldier killed me because he was being a prick.
And that's where I think that you need to look at like the context for the death. If he was to be shot down by a plane, it'd be first of all totally random because it could have shot anybody on the boat. It would be not only that, but just like everybody else being killed by the enemy. But I think that's the metaphor that he's trying to go for here, is that what we're looking at is literally the youth and hope of England in the war versus the despair and defeat of England in the war. And which one is going to be fine? Well, by the end of the story arc, or the character arc here, obviously George does end up losing his sight and dying because of his head injury. But his memory will go on to fuel technically the whole of England. Not necessarily just his memory, of course, but the emotion behind it is the point. That kind of story will go on to inspire others to win the war, versus what we get at the end of the character arc on the other side is that instead of telling him that the guy killed him and he died and he making him feel like shit, we get one of my favorite moments in the movie when Mr. Dawson nods at his son for telling the man that the boy will be okay, because we have to stick together and remain hopeful. Otherwise, what are we other than a defeated enemy?
Okay. When you put it like that, I can give you that how it plays out, where it's the hope aspect. I get that. That, you know what? Fine. George's death makes sense in the context of that, but I'm still a little like, bro, George wasn't a character. He was a plot device.
Let me put it this way,
Will
then,
you
by the
give
way.
me that George wasn't a character? He was a plot device.
He was a character, yeah, but what else do you expect out of a Nolan movie other than the characters be a plot device? Let me put it that way. But also, let me put it this way. If you want to be that cynical, by the way, for anybody who believes in this, why don't we go back to Saving Private Ryan and remember that Private Ryan is totally responsible for Tom Hanks' death in the movie, and he should feel like shit at the end of the movie when he's at his
Tom
grave.
Hanks gave his life willingly because
Yeah.
he's like, you know what, son, this is my job.
But you know what? If he had decided to leave right then, they wouldn't have been around for the attack, and they would have probably all surved getting out because they would have
But
gone
he
back the way
couldn't
they
leave
came.
his brothers. He couldn't leave his brothers in arms, man.
Well, it's a point of pride, and at least he didn't die by, fucking. I mean, whatever. But
I got you.
That's kinda
At
what I
this
mean.
point, we're just kind of agreeing to disagree. But I will say that no, his characterization, how you're describing it, I get that. He is symbolic of the hope of England and all this other stuff. I can dig that.
Yeah, and just because it's not on the nose is my point, and one of the reasons I like this movie is it doesn't have to be totally on the nose like a whole lot of movies out here. Like, and no offense, Saving Private Ryan is a fairly on the nose movie. It's a great on the nose movie, but it doesn't do a whole lot to like get you to dig deeper into the meaning of a lot of the movie. Maybe that's me putting my pretentious film person hat on, but I'll take it off again.
Do you want me to grab your pretentious crown to put it on real quick?
Oh, whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have those three sections of characters. I would also, by the way, say that. Tell me you didn't at least get into Tom Hardy's character. Like that was a character you could get into throughout the movie. You're about to say no, and I'm going to beat the shit out of you next time I see you.
Look, calm down. I'll say this. I thought like the Tom Hardy sequences where he's in the airplane, I thought they were the most exciting bits of the movie. I thought it was like, oh, this is really cool. His friend when he was shot down, I thought there was most tension in the film when he was trying to get out of the sinking airplane. I thought, oh man, that's a lot of like really good stuff in this section. Again, I didn't know Tom Hardy's character's name until I looked it up on IMDb right now. But like, I liked it. I thought Tom Hardy's character was the most interesting. I thought that was the most interesting parts of the movie. I thought the boat stuff was the least interesting. The airplane stuff was the most interesting, and I thought the actual beach stuff was the most like, oh, this is like really the most spectacle of the movie. Like I don't know, but I like the airplane sequences the most.
And the more and more you say, and this is not a dig on you at all, but this is something I'm kind of realizing the more we discuss the movie, the more you say, like, I didn't know the character's name, so I couldn't care about them. Do you think there's something innately, like, I don't want to go out and say, like, draw nation lines, but do you think there's something innately American about that kind of point of view, where you need to know all of the name and stats of a character in order to really get into him? Because I'm thinking, think about this for a moment. Let me draw out a scenario here.
Okay.
You see a guy walking on the sidewalk, and he is attacked by somebody. Do you care about that other person in that moment? Rooting for them to survive this attack or somehow overcome their attacker?
Yes, I would say I would root for them to overcome their attacker.
But you don't know a thing about them.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to assume this isn't like I am also walking on the street and see this. It is like I'm watching a movie and a guy gets attacked, right?
No, I would say even in person, because this is something I've actually experienced.
I would absolutely be like, I hope this guy, is okay. I would probably go in and help the person. Like, yeah, no, that's like the empathy thing.
Yeah, and that's my point, is that I don't think you need to know somebody's name necessarily to you don't need to know somebody just to draw empathy from their story. And the story in this specific moment I've illustrated has actually happened to me, by the way. Once I did witness a guy walking his dog and a homeless man just fucking attacked him.
You didn't help him? What's wrong?
We did. Because it's a long story short, I was on tour at the time, and it was middle of the night. We were having an interview with a friend of ours in a van, our band van, and just randomly on the street in Santa Cruz, guy walking his dog starts fucking fighting with this homeless guy who just attacks him out of nowhere. And we get out, and like somebody called the cops, and like we were sitting there like trying to defuse the situation, yet screaming at the homeless guy. One of my friends finally calms down and was like, yeah, obviously this story has a kind of an anticlimactic end because the guy walking the dog literally just puts his shirt back on and leaves. Like
I
he
like
just,
how he had to pop his shirt off for this fist fight in Santa Cruz.
yeah, because he was like
Lo-
he was kind of like a burly Latino
lo-
guy. He was like, I don't give a fuck, I'm leaving. But in the
I
moment
guess.
initially, yeah, we had no idea who this guy was, but we still felt the need to get out and help him because of the empathy
Well,
bit.
here's the thing. Like, I get that in real life situations, absolutely help the guy getting attacked. In like the movie stuff, I understand that. Like, we're seeing these characters, we don't know a lot about them, but we hope they survive. But here's the thing. It is a uniquely American thing, right? We want to know things about our characters to relate to them. We want relatable characters.
I think
I
it's
took
like
I took a class in like world cinema, and my professor was from like Romania, and she spent years in like Europe, and she was talking about that, and she's like, yeah, in a lot of like foreign films and films from other countries, relatability of characters is not really a thing, or it's
it's
not a
almost like
very emphasized thing in most films.
there's like a marketability that comes along with that. I don't even think it gets on relatability at that point because I think relatability gets down to like the unspoken aspects of the character. There's a certain point at which we just want to have the character marketed us to us real quick so that we can take them with us afterward, so that we know their name, we know who they are, we can reference that in our everyday lives. I don't want to blame superhero films for this. I don't think they're to blame, but it's the same reason that you go to see a superhero film. You know their name so that you can care about them.
We know the name, we know the character, we know their stats. We can hold on to that stuff. My thing is with this movie is these characters, their names don't matter, right? They
Yeah,
don't matter at all.
because there's
The
four hundred
what they
thousand of
are,
them.
yeah, there's 400,000 of them, right? There's 400,000 soldiers on that beach. Any one of them I could have followed, and it would have been the same story. Why is
Yeah,
Tommy unique at all?
well,
What?
because I
Why
think
is
it's
Tommy
just
unique at all?
I just think it comes down to the fact that there's two things about his character in that, yeah, we are actually physically following him because none of the other soldiers are attempting to do what he's doing. Because, yeah, from the beginning, the other part of his story that is unique is that he meets a French guy on the beach burying a British soldier and stealing his clothing. And that's another character that we can kind of follow along in that story. And maybe Nolan wrote that so that it became more followable. And it wasn't just we're watching a deserter. Now we're watching also a refugee, and that we're only following the refugee because they keep kind of coming up with ways to get across these obstacles to get off the beach and leave.
So, I think this movie would have been so much more interesting if we followed the French soldier. The movie starts with him burying the English soldier on the beach, and then we start from there. And then as like we realize he's never talked, we realize all this other stuff. We're following him. And then when we get the reveal that we've been following a French refugee, a soldier, or whatever, that would have been more interesting.
It could be. Yeah.
It's one of those things where like my issues with the movie are the actual like we're on Dunkirk, right? Because I think the boat stuff I can get into that because they're even though it's like the least interesting because like there's just not a lot of things happening. There's also the most dialogue, there's the most conflict, there's the most like people interacting there that are like characters. Like I can understand that, I can dig that. The airplane stuff, it's the most interesting because it's like it's very isolated. We have one character we're following realistically, and there's a lot of action. It's cool. The Dunkirk stuff, I'm like, why are we following Tommy?
Yeah, I will concede that maybe the film could have had like a better twist to it because I could see
Like,
how you if you edited a certain way, you could get the movie to open on him burying the other soldier, and we assume it's his friend who died, and that would maybe even give us like an emotional trigger to follow him from the start. Is that he's trying to get home after losing a friend, but then we find out later on, and which would then also explain like a lack of dialogue. He is French and he doesn't know a lick of English, but I still think that at the very least, Tommy makes up a character that we can follow in English, which does serve your point that it's Nolan coming up with characters as plot devices. But
yeah.
I
Like, I'm
still
not
like
even saying
I
the
like
movie's
Tommy.
bad. I don't even think the movie is bad. That's my problem with the movie, because I think there's too much about the movie that is good, that works, that's above and beyond what like a regular war movie does, and I think it's a very good movie. It's just like Christopher Nolan's got issues writing characters, and I have a problem with that. I'm sorry. Like,
Yeah.
we could, if Tommy's thing was if Tommy was like, hey, I'm an English soldier, I want to get out like everyone else on this beach, but also, I don't know, like in 1917, like we cared about the soldiers in 1917, we cared about all the characters.
Yeah.
Like, what if he was like, oh, I want to get home because like my girlfriend is gonna have a baby or whatever. Give him anything, any characterization that I'm like, okay, this guy is more than just one of 400,000 soldiers trying to leave Dunkirk.
Okay, so that's actually interesting because I think I could break that down and exactly explain why. Um, like in this, like you just said, in this movie, there are 400,000 of us trying to leave. And opposite of Tommy's story, there are two characters who have a very clear objective. There's one of them who's a part of the boat party who is going to pick soldiers up. And
Yes.
we follow them because they're one of the first to leave and not give their boat over to the Navy. That's the unique thing about them, is that they're one of the first to choose as citizens of England to go pitch in for their country. So that's the unique thing there. The other unique thing then about Tom Hardy's story is Farrier. He is one of literally 3 pilots they have available to assist people.
Go and provide cover, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which is probably the most unique in that there's not really anybody else that we can cover in the story in that point of view. Tommy, however, is a part of a group of 400,000 other soldiers and a handful of officers and the rest of the British Navy trying to survive the event that will be the inevitable tragedy of Dunkirk. Obviously, then, we are presented with the problem that you bring up, that in 1917, which, if you haven't seen it, is the one about the two American...
World War One English soldiers who have to travel basically through no man's land to...
They're delivering a message to an army, a company of soldiers, or more than a company, I believe. Whatever you would define
a large battalion of soldiers.
Yeah. To tell them to stop an attack because it's an ambush. And it will literally obliterate a practically the whole battalion. And that in itself is the physical stakes. The emotional stakes of the movie become the reason we're following these two, because one of them is the best friend of the soldier who has a brother in that battalion. So, yeah, there's a reason you follow those two characters, but I would say that as a writer, that's pretty easy to pick out. To be like, okay, well, why are these two guys? Well, he knows somebody in the other battalion. It's his brother. That then creates emotional stakes for the journey, not just the physical stakes.
Can we spoil 1917 a little bit, because I think it'll help your point?
Yeah, of course. And like you said, don't watch the podcast if you want movies spoiled for you. Go out and watch some damn movies.
Yeah, but that's the other thing. In 1917, it works really well because, oh, my brother's in the battalion. I'm going to go see my brother real quick, and you're my best friend, so you're going to come with me. And then the brother character dies, and he's like, now we have this whole other thing. He has to not only give the news that will save the whole battalion, but give his best friend's brother the worst news of the war.
Yeah. Although I do love that lighthearted summation of the plot of 1917. Let's go see my brother real quick.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I am.
But yeah,
again,
you hit the nail on the head.
My view of history is low. So.
But okay, so then I think that feeds to my point in that 1917's emotional stakes literally come from one thing, and that he has a brother in the battalion, which really, if you were to deconstruct it, is not a whole lot to go on.
Yeah,
it's just something to get us to care about these two guys. And while you could give that to Tommy, I think that what Nolan wanted to do in setting up the tone for the film is make it a very generalized stake for every soldier on that beach, that you're basically waiting to die or be saved. You have no power of the situation. So let's follow one soldier who chooses to take a little bit of his own power and try and sneak his way off the beach. Because what he's doing is totally against the rules. He should not be doing what he's doing. He should be waiting around to die like everybody else. But what he's choosing to do there's kind of this interesting theme throughout the movie. There's a philosophical conundrum that comes up. I don't know exactly like the names and professors who come up with this, but it's based on World War One in that there was a soldier who is called to war, and he could either stay home and attend to his dying mother, or leave his mother to die to serve his country to save however many more lives. Now, the moral problem becomes: do you stay and help your mother and assumedly be labeled a coward because you didn't go off to war, or do you go off to war and leave your dying mother?
I get you.
And I think that's what he's dealing with in the movie. Is do you stay on the beach and wait to die because it means you're doing the prideful thing as a countryman? Or do you make an attempt to escape the beach like what everybody else wants to do as the selfish choice? But it's one that as a human, you are driven to do. So, and that I do think that you make a point that Nolan probably could do a better job at addressing that. It's just I think that in his style, he nails the execution of that point in his own special way.
If his objective was to provide a character that was very generalized and was very like, this is the feeling of a lot of the people on the beach, and he is taking the initiative. Like, he's a character that has a purpose, and he has an initiative to leave the island, or leave the beach, unlike many of his other soldiers, and that's the unique thing about him. You know what? Fine. Tommy is not a bad character.
Yeah,
you got it.
And you know what? I'll concede to you too that there are, like I said at the beginning, there are rules being broken with this. I think it's just that I personally can get over them. Some people can't. And I do think that maybe Nolan could use a little bit of like something like the hero's journey in this, because think too, if we go to one of like the greatest examples of the hero's journey, Star Wars, there's 10,000, 20, hundreds of thousands of rebel soldiers that come from similar situations such as Luke. Although Luke does obviously have an interesting bit of that story in that he is apparently the child of Darth Vader and a
Jedi and
unique
magic
to Obi-Wan Kenobi in that he is Force sensitive. But if you were to just go based on like the pilot story alone, which for some reason I feel like Lucas probably started with, and that the mumbo jumbo came later.
I can guarantee George Lucas just bullshitted his way through the sequels.
Yeah, but I think that if you follow that just the pilot getting off the rock story alone, yeah, you would start to run into probably some of the same problems, except that he's going off to fight the greater cause. I think the problem ultimately Nolan runs into is that what the main character is doing is essentially shameful. And then that goes back to the whole moral problem thing. But yeah, I think we've analyzed the characters enough in this movie.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this movie.
I guess let's get to the last bit here, and then we'll wrap it up. I want to talk about the score and the sound design of the movie, because I think the sound is the other half of this movie. It's the half that really ties it ties the room together.
Yes. The sound design and the music in the film are perfect. Again, I will say this: I don't think Hans Zimmer has ever made a bad score.
No.
And there's a motif in the sound design where it's this sound of like a ticking clock within the music, which feels like it's the ticking clock of the movie. You know, it's like, when is it going to happen? When are they going to get here? We have these, it feels very visceral. It's very good.
Yeah, it really puts you in the POV of the soldiers, in that I'm sure while waiting on the beach, you can start to even feel the seconds passing, just like in the score. I don't know. I mean, I really enjoy that about Nolan, is that he is so interested in time. I mean, it's needed because he's into thrillers almost exclusively, but God, if he doesn't pull it off better than anybody else.
But yeah, I still gotta say, like, Saving Private Ryan has better sound design. I'm just throwing it out there.
I don't know.
But the score is better.
I really like the sound design in this movie. Like, from the screaming of the planes and the missiles, and I don't know.
I think the score in Dunkirk is better, though. I think the score works so well within the movie. I think it's a very good use of music in film.
Yeah.
But yeah. Now the other question, the philosophical question: are these good depictions of World War II? Do these feel like they are giving justice to the experiences of the real people?
Yeah, kind of the question we've been following all month, and this one I think is a much more. It's kind of the one where I think we start to really just know the answer as soon as we ask the question. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think both of these films are pretty accurate depictions of these wars. I think we can, like I said, like I brought up last time. Now that we've started to document these wars as they're happening, um,
It becomes less and less excusable for like messing stuff up.
and more probably easier for the filmmakers to recreate them. I think Saving Private Ryan is probably pretty accurate. I think it's probably a little
Well,
simplified for the screen, but I think
well,
it's
it's simplified, and there is, and like the final battle for that bridge and that's town. That's not a real town. That's not a real bridge. It's based on a real thing, and I think that's the thing about Saving Private Ryan. It's based on true events with some true events thrown in, like the Omaha Beach sequence. That's a real thing. I think the town they go to in the first plate, like the first town they go to, is real,
and
and
that's a
like a
story.
lot of
It's a
things are real.
generalized
Yeah,
story, like you said. There were
yeah,
probably thousands of those instances. It's just that they use the research to their advantage to create realistic situations.
yeah. And then we have Dunkirk, which is a very real event, and it's showing three very real instances of what was going on at the time to save Dunkirk. It's a very realistic and accurate depiction. Well, reliable depiction, I'll say, of the events.
Yeah, I would say this movie gets closest to one we will see in that it's like a Full Metal Jacket reel, where it's
Mhm.
almost realistic, not to a fault, but to it's
It
totally.
it's approaching documentary.
Yeah, because like Full Metal Jacket, I mean, the way they shoot the guns in that movie, like we reviewed last month or a couple months ago now, which is crazy to think about, but
Yeah.
the way they shoot the guns in that movie is probably much more realistic to any of these war movies, where
Mhm.
you can see them reloading, guns jamming. You could see that they're spraying rather than aiming. I mean, it's
Yeah.
fairly it's much more real to a real gunfight. Whereas in this movie, what really strikes me is like the speed of the planes is constantly like it is slow by today's standards, but man, it still isn't just titillating action. I mean,
It's very action oriented.
yeah,
I feel like World War II films are evergreen in terms of like filmic war films, right?
yeah.
Mostly because they're very easy to describe like good guy bad guy dynamics in terms of like historical context.
I mean, it's depending upon who you are, but I'm sure most people would agree, is probably the last war we ever had that was like everybody kind of agrees that it was necessary and that there was something we could all rally around within it.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
at,
the last war where we, in the collective we of, America, Europe, whatever, had a defined like bad guy, which was like the Nazis and like the Axis powers. Like, yeah,
yeah, I mean, come on, the Axis powers. How do you not want to go fight them?
yeah.
Um, yeah, and I don't know. I mean, this is probably my favorite double feature this month. I really,
This is a really solid one. I
yeah,
don't know if this is my favorite, but it's up there. Like, granted, I think I like the Grand Illusion, and I think I liked All Quiet on the Western Front and the Grand Illusion a lot, but this might be the best one. Like the actual like best double feature we've done in a good minute.
yeah. I'm interested to see how next week goes. Obviously, for everybody who's been following us all month, we've been going through history, and we're going to end on Vietnam next month. Deer Hunter and
Which is
Apocalypse Now.
Yes, which is going to be a little interesting because I don't know about you, but I actually had a family member who fought in Vietnam as a combat medic.
Yeah, I also have
Yeah.
a family member I'm very close with today. He was an interrogator, and he actually, I think the last time I saw him, or one of the last times we vacationed together, he told me a little bit more about it, and he was stationed in Da Nang, which was
Da
really,
Nang.
yeah, like really close to the shit. Or Dong Ha,
Wow.
actually. Dong Ha, that was the city. But
Yeah.
yeah, he was in it.
Okay.
He's told me about one of the experiences where he had like the firefight at camp. Uh, Man,
Yes.
it's crazy. The story. If you have somebody out there who you related to who was in one of these wars, go talk to them because you're bound to get some
They
amazing
are
stories.
living history.
Yeah.
They are living history, and you need to interact with them. But I almost forgot. So David, we can agree, great double feature.
Fantastic double feature. Yeah.
We can agree that people anywhere can watch these and enjoy them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say so. I would say both these movies are probably going to be more for history buffs still. But
They're getting closer and closer to just being good filmic entertainment.
an interesting note about Dunkirk. You probably noticed that Harry Styles was in this film.
Yeah, for like 20 minutes, I think. I don't know.
Well, he's one of the main characters you follow throughout it. He's there.
Really?
A collective main character in a collective
Oh,
20 minutes probably.
yeah. Like, I think he had like 20 to 30 minutes of on-screen time.
But you follow him from about the third point through the movie to the end, and he's there at the end. But yeah, so an interesting thing I found out when watching this movie, I just rented it on YouTube, and watched it there as I often do with these movies. And in the comments section, I found the audience for this movie primarily Harry Styles fans.
I knew it.
So
movie.
apparently
Is
that's
that
the
why
audience we're working with.
Is that why it didn't win the Oscar?
I don't know. I mean, he should. A lot of people should have gotten an Oscar for this movie. I do think.
Well, it's the same thing about Saving Private Ryan. You know what it lost its Oscar to?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'm sure it's something kind of asinine.
Shakespeare in Love.
Yeah, it's stupid.
You know why? Because Harvey Weinstein lobbied against Saving Private Ryan real hard so he can get Shakespeare in Love to win. Another reason to hate Harvey Weinstein.
On top of the many, but that would
on
probably
top of the many other real life reasons to hate Harvey Weinstein. Here's another one.
It's probably way up there, though. I mean,
Yeah.
It sucks when you really do think about that. Those award shows are a lobby, but ours is not. So be here at the end of the year, and you will see that we treat everything fairly on this podcast.
Yes, we're real. We're real here at the film club or at the double feature. But yeah. So if you only had one of them to watch this weekend, what are you gonna watch if you can't watch both?
This Dunkirk. I mean, we probably knew that we're going to be divided on this. I think that ultimately the reason, though, comes just down to time. If I had to choose which movie would be a better, more comfortable watch, I'm going to choose hour 45 over 3.5 hours almost every time.
It's just a solid 3. You're the one who abused yourself with the extended cut.
Yeah, that's true. But still, I think that it's a much more digestible runtime in Dunkirk, and that what it does within its runtime is it's an experience from beginning to end. And I think that would be my justification. Though I certainly understand that if somebody's out there trying to get in the feels maybe a little bit more, you're gonna go with Dunkirk.
You want a good one, yeah. Like I think Saving Private Ryan, it holds up to this day, same as it did years ago. I think it's still a solid movie.
Yeah.
I give credit to Dunkirk. I think it comes down to these are both super quality films, and each one of them deserve your time. Watch Saving Private Ryan if you have the extra hour to watch, and if you don't, then watch Dunkirk. I think I know it's a really sad thing for me to say, but they're both too good. Just it comes down to how much time do you got to watch.
Yeah, or even I would just say that they're two different styles of films. If you're looking for more of a drama, go watch Saving Private Ryan. If you really do want the Christopher Nolan thriller, watch Dunkirk, because it really tugs at your heart rate for a while.
Yeah, it is definitely two different styles, and they both work very well. They're both very good.
Yeah.
But next week we're still keep on marching, and as we already said, I'm excited. I'm excited for Apocalypse Now and The Deer Hunter.
Absolutely.
I've never seen The Deer Hunter before, which
Me neither.
Ooh, okay. And Apocalypse Now I've seen a bunch of times. You?
I've seen plenty of Apocalypse Now. I haven't seen it all the way through, beginning to end yet. So okay. I'll be interested.
I'm feeling good.
Yeah.
Feeling good. All right, everybody. David, why don't you tell people where they can watch us if they want to watch more?
Right. To come back with us next week for the final week of War Movie Month, you can follow us on anywhere you can grab podcasts and consume them, like a fine wine. You can follow us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Podcast PD Time. I don't know. If you listen to a podcast on it, you could probably find us, and you will find us as the Double Score or the Double Feature Podcast. Double Score. That's where we review scores of movies.
Don't say that. Then we'll actually have to make that podcast.
That'd be kind of fun. But you can also find our other show on there, Too Obscure for TV, as well as you can find both shows on our YouTube channel, In the Frame. Follow us on there for some extra content coming eventually as well. And you can follow us on Instagram to keep up with everything we do. We post a little graphics for both of these shows on there. It is Double Feature
_ podcast. I know I had to interrupt you. We got it right though. We're good. But yeah, that's what we got here at the Double Feature. Excited for next week?
I am very much. Final battle, I guess we'll call it, in War Movie Month, and then we're off to a much more lighthearted month, which we will talk to you about next time. Okay, well, I'm exhausted after these two endlessly fascinating, thrilling movies, so I'm going to sign off for now, along with my co-host Dean. Thank you very much for sharing these movies with me this week.
All right, everybody. See you next week. Thanks, David. Peace.
See ya.